In this podcast, we discuss unsolved cases that may be violent in nature in an effort to keep the cases in the public eye and continue the stories of the victims. Those who choose to or choose against participating are not indicative of involvement in any crimes we discuss. Listener discretion is advised. According to a 2006 article from the Crime and Justice Matters magazine, the reasons or motives for murder can be condensed into 4 sets of L's: lust, love, loathing, or loot. In today's episode, we discuss the potential theories that surround this homicide, keeping those motives in mind. This is Tragedy, a true crime podcast.
One thing I want to address before we get too far into this episode is some of the things that we've been hearing from the community. Maybe some specific areas of community. It's definitely a small group. What were our motives? And it's interesting to me. It was brought up that we did this for money. Anyone who's listening, I'm going to let you know right now that we're not making any money off this. This is actually costing us money. We've had to buy software. We had to buy new mic systems to improve the audio. Trust me, and no one's endorsing this. Notice there's no ads in these podcasts. So there's no money to be made here. And then let's even go, well, maybe we're after the reward if we solve the murder. While I really do hope this podcast leads to some kind of resolution in this case, again, not our motivation. And I'll go ahead and say up front, and for everyone to hear, even if it somehow money comes to us as far as a reward and we do something or stumble on something that solves this case, that reward money in its entirety will be given to the Kilgore family. We're not interested in that. That's not what we're here about. We're here to do this for one reason and one reason only. We're here to do it because we want to help the family keep this in front of the community, keep this in front of law enforcement, and express the importance of solving this particular case. The second thing that we wanted to address is the fact that, the same small group of people have also indicated that we've gotten a couple of the facts wrong. Now, to begin with, this has been an incredibly difficult thing to put together because a lot of people just won't talk. And a lot of people, even if they do talk, they won't talk on the record. We're not hearing from law enforcement. And there's an entire side of the Kilgore family that has chosen not to participate in the podcast, meaning that a lot of the information they could provide that could be helpful is going to be missing. What I'm going to say here, instead of going behind the scenes and talking to people that we're speaking with and trying to correct things and indicating we've got things wrong, I'm giving you an open invitation right now to come on the podcast and set the record straight. You want your side to be told? By all means, we want your side to be told. Come join us on the podcast. We will welcome you any day, anytime.
Before we start talking about rumors and theories, let's set some ground rules. Anything that we discuss today, we've heard from at least 2, 3, sometimes even 4 people. And this information we've collected through lots of different ways. We've had people call us. We've had on-the-record interviews. We've had several off-the-record interviews. We've got public records research happening, social media, background searches, and we've also received emails on our special email that we have set up for the podcast. So we're not just taking like one thing that someone said in one place and running with it.
We needed to see this theme of those types of statements come up multiple times. We gave ourselves a rule when talking about building this episode that we just weren't going to talk about anything that we haven't heard in multiple places. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the ground rule.
Okay. And something sort of interesting came up in the background searches that we've been doing that we want to share with you.
Yeah, I mean, we're really just kind of joking here a little bit, but every single person we did a public records background check on had dozens and dozens of traffic violations. I just want to let everyone know in the Waukesha County community that if you're driving in Waukesha County, be very careful. None of these people can drive. So it's just, it seems like a very unsafe place to drive.
All right, let's get into it. So we're going to address these rumors and theories, starting with what is least supported and moving forward from that.
Right.
So, of course, if you've listened to episode 3, you heard this ridiculous thing, which is what we're going to just automatically take off the table, that Jody faked his own death.
Yeah, that's kind of a hard one for us to take seriously because, we obviously we have Jody's body. We know that an autopsy was performed. We have blood evidence. And I don't know how much more I could really say about that.
Yeah. Then we also have this is more of a rumor, not necessarily a theory in my perspective, and it's the hitman rumor.
Yeah, the hitman one to me is kind of interesting because whenever you think of hitman, you really, everyone thinks about movies, they think about mobsters, and, do I think it's something like that? No. But, there was, a situation where, we've heard from multiple where someone could have been hired. I don't put a lot of value in this particular theory. Because we're not talking about people have tons of money here. We're not talking about, situations where Jody was, from what we could tell, wrapped up with any kind of, major operation that would have made him a target. And, I'm not taking this one completely off the table, but the concept of what I traditionally think a hitman is I don't think very realistic based on what we've seen.
And then we have sort of this random person theory, and this is sort of supported by the location of the house. It seems to be near the St. Mark bike trail. There seems to be some sort of, maybe it's a business or a house that has several cars or something that could be accessed that is behind the location where the murder happened. But I mean, I don't know. The random kind of person thing.
Well, it's interesting because, this is something, my mother used to work for a Leon County Sheriff's Office, and we had conversations whenever there were certain types of crime investigations going on. And she said something to me one time that I remember. And she said, one of the best ways to get away with murder is to murder someone you don't know. And so when you start thinking about the fact that this case is unsolved and there's so many different avenues that we go here, can we necessarily discount the fact that maybe Jody was murdered by someone he didn't know? Not really, because there's a couple of other concepts or things that we've been told that kind of fold in here. We've had multiple people talk about something as simple as copper theft. Now, my issue with the copper theft is this is a pretty brutal, in-your-face crime to be about theft. And, one of the things we also have to acknowledge is that's an awful lot to hide and to keep your mouth shut, especially if there was multiple people. I just feel like if that really were what had happened, if this was really a copper theft gone bad, I've said the same thing before, earlier episodes, is I just feel like they'd been picked up in a week. I mean, we're not talking about scholars here. We're talking about people who were stealing. We're talking about people who were going after copper. We're talking about something that would have been random, unplanned. Jody stumbled on these people, or they stumbled on him when he was outside waiting for Toby to pick him up. I just feel like there had to be more thought put into it to be able to get away with this long. And most importantly, everyone would have had to keep their mouth shut. And what is the likelihood of that?
Yeah.
People like to talk. People in general like to talk. We've had a lot of people talk to us off the record. We've had a lot of people reach out in email. We've had Facebook conversations. So I just feel like, I'm not saying this theory is impossible. I'm just saying this theory is not high on my list for consideration.
But we do have 3 theories that we think have a little more meat to them. And those are the ones that we'll spend more time discussing. So the first theory is around Toby, Jody's business partner. The second theory is around Susan, Jody's spouse. And the third theory is around drugs and that kind of thing that was revolving around with several people, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the business partner, Toby. We know that Toby had opportunity. He was on the site of the murder. He's the one that discovered Jody's body, and he's the one that made the 911 call at 10:21. Okay, let's talk about what supports the theory, what doesn't support the theory. The murder. Let's go back to the scream for a second. The yelling, the screaming that happened. We're theorizing, conservatively 9:50. So shortly before 10. So if you measure the time between that scream and when the call happened, it's only 31 minutes, which means Toby would have had to get the argument, commit the murder, get home, clean up, change clothes, come back, and then call 911, all in a 31-minute period. Now, granted, acknowledged, he lives down the road. We looked at the maps on this. Conservatively, it's a tight timeline. We get it all the way down to really 10 minutes to get cleaned up and get back and make that call. If you believe the scream is the time of the murder, you have to believe that too. That's not a lot of time. And if you're the one making the 911 call, why not just give yourself more time? You could have given yourself an additional 15 minutes, and this would have been something that would have been a little bit more achievable in that timeline. So let's also talk about what we've heard about Toby from multiple people associated with the Kilgore family, is how good of friends they were. They were like brothers to each other. They hung out all the time. So him attacking Jody in such a brutal way just doesn't feel very likely to the family. In fact, Robin and multiple people that we've talked to, Robin was on the podcast in episode 2. She even said, that's not realistic. Okay, so there's that. Now, what about the one thing about his account that I personally don't like? And I was not in the Toby camp this entire time, but there's one part of his account that I really struggle with, and I don't like the fact that his account includes a shower and a change of clothes. Because from my understanding, he went to the gym, which is reported by several people, took a shower, changed clothes, went and picked up Jody. And so the one thing that I was hanging my hat on was the fact that there was no blood evidence on Toby. There just wasn't. And this would have been a particularly difficult thing to pull off if you're the one who committed the murder. There's nothing in the truck that we know of. There's nothing on Toby we know of. Because again, even though law enforcement has to talk to us about it, if these things were true, Toby would have been arrested that day. He wasn't. So, not to mention the cameras associated with filming Toby's truck going in and out of this road were Toby's own security cameras. Why would he offer that evidence? I mean, it condemns him to being kind of in the spotlight for that type of theory. So at this point, I'm not sure there's anything more on Toby we can talk about, but you can see we have things that support it, things that don't support it. And then I don't know where else we can take that one.
Yeah, there are a few other things that I think sit in that doesn't support Toby as being the person who committed the murder, and that is we don't seem to see or have, no one's reported any history of violence from Toby at the time in 2014 or before.
At the time, 2014 and before, we do have it after.
And we also don't have any indication, we haven't found any indication or heard any indication of Toby's involvement with drugs like weed or
That's
meth
true.
or those kinds of things.
That's true. We've had a lot of conversations about drugs, which we'll get to later.
No.
But regarding Toby specifically, his name never comes up.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't come up in those conversations. Now, there's a rumor associated with steroids. Not sure that's related or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But again, it doesn't go back into any of the theories regarding drugs. Again, when we start talking about that group of people, he's just never there. He's never part of that story.
Yep. And then we also remember from the episode 3, and we find out from the law enforcement, Toby's behavior at the crime scene.
Oh yeah, he was distraught.
Frantic.
Mm-hmm. It's hard to, we've seen enough crime shows that someone can put on a pretty good performance. But, it's based on every person that's talked about how Toby was reacting at the scene. This is not someone who just committed murder.
Mm-hmm. Now, you did talk a little bit about routine, and I just do want to say that several people have said to us that this was Toby's typical routine. He would take, I believe it's his grandchildren to the bus, then he would go to the gym, and then he would go and pick up Jody. So there's no deviation from what people have told us was his typical routine when they were working together.
Right. And so if you had planned to kill someone, let's just go down that route for a second. If you plan to kill someone, would you do it in a place that you were routinely at all the time? To where even if no one knew you were there, they would be able to say, well, Toby's typically here at this time. Where was Toby? Mm-hmm. So why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. And then the one last thing that I think we do want to discuss, we know that there was an LLC that was formed prior with Jody and Toby, and that we had talked about how that was dissolved a couple of years before the incident in 2014.
Let's be clear here, though. Even though the LLC was dissolved, we have enough evidence now that they were still operating their business. They just weren't doing it under the LLC.
Yeah, true. And then something I found fairly early on when I was doing a records review was this new LLC that was formed by Toby, and the timing of that just felt a little weird.
So was it 8 weeks?
To us. Yeah, it was December 17th, 2014, which is, 8-9 weeks after this homicide. Then there's this LLC that pops up that is, from what we can tell from the public records, it's Toby and his wife. So it just, the timing seemed a little odd for us.
The last thing we can talk about when it comes to Toby, that at least what we stumbled upon, is we had several people that have indicated that there was some kind of loan, or someone borrowed money. Maybe it was Jody and Susan borrowed money from Toby. Again, we can't substantiate that, but we have heard that from multiple people. And the challenge that I see with that is, again, I go back to, this is his friend. I could see this being a problem. I can see it challenging the friendship if they were struggle paying it back. Do I see that escalate all the way to murder? No.
All right, let's move into Susan.
All right.
Right. So what we know, and everyone who listens to true crime, everybody knows when someone is murdered.
Oh, the spouse did.
Oh yeah, they look at who's there, who showed up first, and we always look at the spouse and the close circle. That's just part of protocol. So there are some things that we think don't support this theory of her involvement, and most predominantly is, now I never met Jody, but you did.
Yep. And
apparently he was a pretty large, stout,
pretty big guy, strong guy. He's not
right.
You're not just going to be able to grab him and manhandle him in a way. You're going to need, if you're small, you're going to need some help.
Yeah, and we have heard from a close family member that there were some pretty significant defensive wounds on one arm, I think is what we were told. And I have actually met Susan, and she's really tiny.
That's right.
She's super tiny, and it doesn't really feel like this would be something that, just as far as the stature, would be something that would happen. She's just too small. She's too small. We also know that they had recently reconciled. Right? We've heard from several people that they had separated for a little while, and then they had fairly recently before this happened. We can't really tell if it was a couple years or a year, but they had reconciled, and
we couldn't find people who agreed on that
on the timeline. So that's right.
We don't know that.
Yep, that's correct. And Jody had moved back in to obviously that he was living there at the time when the homicide happened. So, they had just gotten back together, or were working on coming back together and reconciling. And we also know, again, this came from the town hall, that several people in the family, biological evidence was collected from them, whether that's blood or hair or whatever.
Yep. And we go right back to, if there was biological evidence of a family member, now we're dealing with a family member, again, there would have been a match, most likely, and we wouldn't be having this conversation for this podcast right now. We'd be working on something else.
Yeah, and remember, Detective Sriracha said we have this one piece of evidence that hasn't matched,
that we've theorized is the murder weapon.
Right. So if we're collecting information from everybody, particularly the spouse, which they're going to do, collecting that biological evidence, there would be a match.
Correct.
Right. So these are the things that don't support this theory. There are some things that do support the theory of possibly her involvement. So you had talked about how Toby didn't really deviate that day, according to what people tell us.
According to what people told us, it's because he was right within routine, yes.
We have heard from several people that Susan did deviate her typical routine that day.
Her routine was during her break at work, she would have Max Meats. Everyone says she pick up some cigarettes or something like that. And that particular day, she didn't do that. She went somewhere else. She went into Crawfordville. And this was way out of her way. And she produced a receipt so she could prove she was there, from what we've been told.
From a gas station.
From that gas station.
In Crawfordville, yeah.
But the question is, why that day? It's one of those things that it proves nothing. But it's odd that day we deviate from routine.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then we know we have the neighbor who said he heard what he reported to be a female screaming. That doesn't mean it was her.
He didn't say anything. He didn't look outside.
Yeah.
He didn't check on it, and the idea that he didn't check outside bothered me.
Yeah.
So we started digging into that as well, and it goes back to, even though they had reconciled, he's back, there was obviously still problems. There was obviously still some challenges there in rebuilding that relationship. And the comment that we were told was, the reason he didn't look outside is because hearing commotion in that direction wasn't incredibly uncommon.
Mm-hmm. We have also had several people talk to us about potential infidelity. And obviously we know they were separated for a time. That doesn't mean that people are, not being monogamous, but sometimes when people are married and they separate, that is what happens. So we do have this kind of theme of potential infidelity.
It's hard for me to have a strong opinion there. I mean, do I think we've heard enough that, there was definitely, they were seeing other people? Yeah, I think we've heard enough to know that's true. Do we know whether it's the timeline they were actually together, living together, and not separated? No, because again, we can't even confirm that timeline, because we've heard everything from a couple of weeks to 2 years.
Yeah.
So the big thing that makes me kind of throw the infidelity concept out is from as far as being related to the murder, is the fact that I don't think that would produce the fear that we're seeing in the community.
Mm.
There's so many people that have talked to us, and the first thing they tell us is how afraid they are to have a conversation, that they don't want their name used, which is fine. We're not using anyone's name here. But that didn't approve it. But we get into this situation. I'm like, okay, cool. If we believe that, because one of the crazier theories related to this is, there was some infidelity, and Susan's boyfriend, was hired or asked to kill Jody. I mean, I think this is a ridiculous concept. I think there's no evidence to support that. And at the end of the day, even if that were true, why the fear in the community? Where's that coming from?
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
It doesn't support that being the truth.
And frankly, having an affair does not mean you're also going to go murder someone. Like there's really it's not a direct link, we'll say. The final thing that we have heard from several people related to Susan is this pattern of aggression. So, we said earlier that we didn't really see that no one really told us anything about Toby being aggressive at the time of the homicide or even before. But we do have several people talking about a pattern of aggression with Susan, physical altercations with family members. Of course, you hit on the arguments that were happening, which could be why the neighbor
didn't look
outside. He didn't call or didn't do anything because he's kind of used to hearing the loud arguing. And we have people telling us that they have overheard challenging conversations between Jody and Susan, like on speakerphone, or even you don't even have to go on speaker. Sometimes when someone's yelling, you can hear that they're yelling. And I think most notably what is of concern to us is this absence of recent participation, whether it be in this podcast or the vigils, the community event that we outlined last year. We did have someone tell us that Susan and several people were at the funeral. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, we've had people say, she doesn't go to the vigils. She doesn't go to any of them. Now, again, that doesn't mean that you murdered someone, but this was a traumatic event, right? And so there's some potential of not wanting to go to the vigils because it brings it up again. But it does seem unusual that if your husband were murdered, I can only speak for how I would behave. Again, it's really sort of, we have to be careful. I think about this conversation because you never really know how someone's going to behave in trauma. But it sits a little odd with me.
Oh, I agree with that.
Yeah. And the final theory that we want to discuss is the theory of some level of drug involvement, people who are doing drugs, have drugs, being involved in this. There's really only one thing that we can sort of talk about that doesn't support this theory, and that is that we really have no indication of Jody's involvement. I think you mentioned kind of at the beginning of doing drugs other than some marijuana.
Yeah. We know that, Jody Katie smokes.
Right. And that, like,
who doesn't? A little bit of weed occasionally. Come on, let's be honest. And yeah, I mean, when you start getting into drug conversation, first of all, I'm going to start with this. We are purposely not going to use names after this point because there was so many different connections. If anyone's interested in the names, they're going to have to do their own public record search. Because we're not trying to condemn anyone or make anyone look bad during this part of the conversation. All we're going to do is acknowledge how strong the drug connection was in multiple areas. So you want to start with that?
Yeah, you took it right out of my mouth there. This was persistent across almost everyone that we have talked to or has reached out to us. Drugs this is like the golden thread. Drugs are related.
It's even one of the things that it's why it surprised us when the detectives at the community event indicated that, when they talked about their theories, they didn't include a drug theory. Because when we listened to that, again, we were like, how did you not? Because we can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the evidence that we found that puts family members close to Jody involved in drugs. We know from an August 2015 article on the WTXL webpage that there were 5 people, 3 of whom we know are related to Jody, and they were attempting to buy Sudafed at the Walgreens. Well, yeah, they were attempting to obtain Sudafed.
And they were buying anything.
At the Walgreens. And an employee called law enforcement to issue trespass warnings to these 5 people. So when law enforcement arrived, 2 of the 5 were found to have open warrants.
Yep.
Right. And as soon as that happens, then, we've got probable cause. Right. So they bring the canine, and the canine goes around the car. We've all seen it. If you watch, On Patrol Live or Live PD, you watch, and the dog alerts. And sure enough, dog alerts on this car. They check the vehicle and they find meth, marijuana, and drug paraphernalia all in this vehicle, where these 5 had traveled together to obtain the Sudafed.
Right.
So one of those individuals who was related to Jody was arrested for having possession of more than 20 grams of marijuana. And the other individual with the open warrant was charged with resisting arrest and possession of meth. So we got the marijuana, the drug paraphernalia, all that kind of stuff. The other 3 individuals of the original 5, which included 2 family members of Jody, were just given the trespass warning. So we have these 5 people. Several of them are related to Jody. This is shortly after. This is actually a year. Exactly a year after the homicide. And we're wrapped up with these people with marijuana, drug paraphernalia, possession of meth. And then we also know that one of those 5 original people, who is a family member of Jody, was charged in 2018 with 2 counts of possession and sale of meth, 1 count each of possession with intent to distribute meth, possession of MDMA, which is ecstasy, possession of a synthetic narcotic, and 2 counts of use of a 2-way communication device to commit a felony. And this is all according to the Wakulla Sheriff's Office Facebook post in December of 2018. So we say all this to say this is why the drugs keep coming up when we talk to people, right? So shortly after the homicide, within a year, and then 3 years later, we've got people very close to Jody who are wrapped up in meth. We've even heard cocaine kind of sporadically here and there from people.
And we've got potentially a drug deal that went down with some guy in Panacea regarding what we believe is either cocaine or meth. We've got, people who have reported us about multiple trips to Tallahassee to pick up cocaine. And, in reality, this is peppered all through this story, both before and after Jody's murder. So again, I go back to what I said before. Not having a drug theory around this seems odd. And it kind of makes me feel like, one of the things Detective Sriracha said was, if I had a theory, you would never know about it. Well, instead of acting like Columbo, I think maybe we do know about it. Maybe this is the theory we're not talking.
Yeah, and so what this all boils down to is that possibly someone in Jody's family got in over their head, right? And Jody was the victim of whatever the scenario was.
Caught in the crossfire.
Yeah.
Again, no evidence he was any more involved than, smoking a little weed occasionally. But, maybe if he was more involved, we haven't heard that. Maybe he was involved in the crosshairs of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they came looking for something. He didn't understand it, and he is the message. And maybe that's where the fear comes from.
Yes, that's exactly where I was about to go, to bring us all the way back to this fear that we had talked about earlier. Several people have said or reported Facebook posts where someone has said, hey, you need to stop doing this, or else the same thing will happen to you that happened to Jody. So this is where the fear makes sense, because earlier you talked about where it didn't make sense.
I couldn't come up with the fear piece.
Mm-hmm.
And when I start thinking about all these theories we've discussed, the fear, I would be fearful if I was involved in this part of it. And so I couldn't blame people for having the same response I would have myself. Okay, so what do we do from here? How do we kind of bring all this together? Well, our goal here wasn't to solve Jody's murder. Would I like that to be the outcome? Yes. Our goal was to gather as much information as we could, put it in a consumable format, talk about the theories a little bit more openly, talk about what is realistic, not realistic, and really just encourage the community to be a bit more open and a bit more forthcoming when it comes to what they may know about this particular case. The sheriff's office has an open investigation right now. Now, I know we can make the argument, because we certainly can, because the sheriff's office hasn't called us back either. But at this point, I can't even argue the fact that we were both in Denver at the time of the murder. We're just podcasters. We're just here to put as much information out there as we can and to make sure that this story stays in front of the public, stays in front of the community, and stays in front of the sheriff's office, that this community wants this solved. And the only way it's going to happen is, I'm going to just kind of restate one of the things Wakulla County Sheriff's Office said is, we need more evidence. We need more people coming here and talking to us. Guys, if you know something, go knock on the door to the sheriff's office. Give them that piece of information. Let's bring closure to what happened here. And if you don't have anything, great, no problem. Show up to the vigils. Show up, show support. Don't let this kind of disappear out into the ether.
Despite extensive investigations by the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, no arrests have been made and the case remains unsolved. It is the only unsolved homicide in Wakulla County. Authorities continue to seek information from the public to help solve the case. The Kilgore family has been vocal in their pursuit of justice, keeping the case in the public eye and urging anyone with information to come forward. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement has also shared appeals for assistance on social media, emphasizing the importance of community involvement in resolving this case. If you have any information related to George Jody Kilgore's murder, please contact the Wakulla County Sheriff's Office, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, Big Bend Crime Stoppers at 850-574-8477, or you can email us at whokilledgeorgekilgore@gmail.com.